The dust hung thick in the air that August afternoon, turning the main street of Dry Creek into a choking haze of grit and heat. The town had stopped pretending to fight the summer anymore. Even the wind had given up, hanging still, as if afraid to stir the misery that clung to every building, every man, every soul who called this dry patch of Wyoming home. Margaret Rose Bennett pressed her back against the sun-baked wall of Henderson's General Store, trying to make herself small. She had learned long ago how to disappear in plain sight, how to breathe quietly, how to blend with the wood grain and the shadows. But no amount of stillness could make her unseen when her father came looking. Across the street, the doors of the Silver Dollar Saloon burst open. Thomas Bennett staggered out into the sunlight, his shirt half untucked, a whiskey bottle swinging loosely from one hand. The moment Margaret saw the red climbing his neck, she knew he was past reasoning. That shade always meant danger. She had lingered too long at the store, an hour maybe, pretending to look over bolts of calico she couldn't afford, talking softly with Mrs. Henderson, who had offered a look of pity but not a word of help. No one ever did. Everyone in Dry Creek knew about Thomas Bennett's temper. Everyone knew about the bruises that never had time to fade before new ones took their place. And everyone pretended not to see. "Margaret!" His voice cracked across the street like a whip. Heads turned, boots scuffed. A few men shifted uneasily, but no one stepped forward. Her stomach tightened. She'd heard that voice since childhood, that tone that meant he'd had too much drink, too much rage, and needed someone to bleed for it. "I'm coming, Pa," she called softly, forcing her shaking legs to move. Each step felt heavier than the last. The sound of her boots against the hard dirt was swallowed by the quiet murmur of the crowd that had started to gather, miners coming off shift, ranch hands from the livery, women lingering with baskets in their arms. Every eye followed her, but not one person offered to stop what they all knew was about to happen. Thomas Bennett waited near the hitching post, the sun glaring off his sweat-streaked face. Once, before life and liquor hollowed him out, people said he'd been a good man. Margaret couldn't remember that version anymore. The man in front of her was carved from anger and whiskey fumes. "Where you been, girl?" he slurred, gripping her arm the moment she got close. His fingers bit into bruises that were still healing from last week. "Told you to have supper ready by 5. I was getting supplies, Pa," she whispered. "I came straight." The first blow came so fast, she didn't even finish the sentence. His open hand cracked against her cheek, hard enough to make her head snap sideways. A gasp rose from the crowd. No one moved. The taste of blood filled her mouth. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Crying only made him angrier. "You talk back now?" Thomas barked, spit flying. "Think you're better than me? Think you can shame me in front of everyone?" Quote. He yanked her hair, dragging her down to her knees in the dust. Her bonnet fell off, pins scattering like sparks. Her long, dark hair spilled loose, glinting in the sun. The world blurred. All she could see was the dirt inches from her face. All she could hear was the low murmur of watchers who would do nothing. "Please, Pa," she whispered, voice trembling. "Not here." "Not here?" he mocked, his laughter sharp and cruel. "You worried about your good name? You don't have one." He struck again, this time with a closed fist. The blow split her lip. Someone muttered, "That's enough, Tom." But the voice died fast when Thomas turned a wild glare their way. He hauled her up by her arm, shaking her like a rag doll. "You'll learn your place, girl. The good book says honor thy father, and by God you will honor me if I have to beat it into your bones." She didn't look at the faces around her, but she could feel them. The banker, the blacksmith, the storekeeper, people who'd watched her grow up. Some looked away. Others stared like they were watching a sideshow. Her shame burned hotter than the sun overhead. Then everything stilled. The air itself seemed to tighten. A soft metallic sound broke the silence. The slow jingle of spurs. It was a sound different from the cowboys' noisy swagger. It was quieter, deliberate. When Margaret lifted her head, she saw him standing at the edge of the crowd, tall, motionless, watching, an Apache. He stood apart not just by the color of his skin or his clothes, but by the air around him, calm, centered, dangerous in its stillness. His hair hung black and straight past his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather. His shirt was worn but clean, his vest decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the light. A hunting knife rested at his hip, a pistol holstered on the other side. The townsfolk whispered. Margaret caught fragments. The savage, traitor, ought to keep to his own. She'd seen him once or twice before, trading furs at Henderson's store. They called him Silent Crow. No one knew his real name. Thomas was too drunk to notice him yet. He raised his hand again, the back of it catching the light as it arced toward her. That's when it happened. Enough. The single word sliced through the heat and noise like a blade through cloth. Not shouted, spoken low and even, but it carried. Everyone heard it. Thomas froze mid-swing. Heads turned. The Apache was closer now, his dark eyes locked on the drunken miner. "What did you say?" Thomas demanded, his voice cracking. The Apache didn't flinch. He stepped forward slowly, each movement controlled, certain. "I said enough." A shiver ran through the gathered crowd. The silence felt alive. "She's mine now," the Apache said quietly, each word falling like a stone into water. Thomas blinked, not sure he'd heard right. Then his face twisted in fury. "You gone mad, Indian? This is my daughter." The Apache's gaze never wavered. A man who beats his daughter in the street has no claim to her. "She is under my protection now." The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "Lord, help us." Sheriff Watson appeared at the far end of the street, uncertain whether to step in. Margaret's heart pounded. The world had tilted. Someone had finally spoken the word she'd prayed to hear all her life. Enough. Thomas let out a harsh laugh, trying to reclaim control. "You think you can take her? She's mine by law, savage." The Apache took another step closer. "Your law watched her bleed. My law does not." A murmur spread through the bystanders. Even those who despised him couldn't look away. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, though she wasn't sure if it was pain or something else. The wild, terrifying spark of hope. For the first time, her father hesitated. The Apache stood 3 feet away, unarmed except for the certainty in his eyes. The town held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And for the first time in her life, Margaret Rose Bennett felt that maybe, just maybe, someone might stand between her and the storm. The street had gone so still that even the flies seemed to have vanished. The townsfolk watched, half hidden behind porch posts and barrels, afraid to breathe. Thomas Bennett's face flushed deeper, the drunken heat rising up his neck and ears. His pride, his authority, his whole twisted sense of power. All of it was being challenged in front of everyone. "You don't tell me what to do, Indian," he snarled. "Get back to whatever hole you crawled out of." But the Apache didn't move. He stood as solid as the mountains behind them. "I come from no hole," he said quietly, "and this woman will not be struck again." Margaret Rose's breath caught. He spoke as if the matter were already decided, as if her father's rage meant nothing. "You hear that?" Thomas shouted to the crowd, gesturing wildly. "He thinks he can just take my daughter. You all gonna stand by and let that happen?" No one answered. Men stared at the dirt. Women clutched their shawls. Sheriff Watson shifted uneasily but didn't step forward. Everyone had already watched one beating. No one wanted to start a war. Thomas's eyes darted from face to face and found no support. The humiliation twisted him inside out. He stumbled toward the Apache, fists clenched, whiskey fumes rising from his breath. "You got one chance to walk away, savage." The Apache didn't even blink. "I have given my word," he said. "She is under my protection now." Thomas swung. It wasn't much of a punch. His balance gone, his body slow from drink, but it carried years of bitterness behind it. The Apache sidestepped easily. His hand shot out, catching Thomas's wrist mid-swing. In one smooth motion, he twisted it down and away. Thomas let out a roar of pain as the bottle clattered to the ground and shattered. The Apache released him at once, letting him stumble back. He hadn't hurt him more than necessary. But the message was clear. Margaret stared, half in disbelief. No one had ever stopped her father before. Thomas staggered, clutching his wrist. "You'll pay for that," he hissed. "You and that worthless girl both." The Apache turned to the sheriff, his voice even. "This man beats women in your streets. Do your laws allow this?" Quote. Sheriff Watson looked trapped. "Now hold on," he began. "This here's family business. Ain't my place to." The Apache's eyes hardened. "Then your laws are worth less than dust." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "He's right." Thomas straightened, his voice rising again. "You can talk all you want, but she's coming home with me." He reached for Margaret's arm. The Apache stepped between them, one hand resting lightly on the knife at his belt. "She will go nowhere she does not choose." Margaret's pulse hammered. She couldn't look away from him, from the calm in his face, the quiet certainty in his words. He wasn't threatening her father. He was simply refusing to move. "Margaret," Thomas barked, "tell this savage you belong to me." Her voice trembled, but she managed. "Pa, please." "Say it," he shouted, his voice cracking with fury. "I don't belong to anyone," she whispered. The words shocked her as much as they did him. They had slipped out before she could think, but once said, she couldn't take them back. Thomas blinked, as if struck by something harder than any fist. Then his face twisted into rage again. "You ungrateful?" "Enough," the Apache said once more, the word calm but final. He turned to Margaret, his gaze softening. "You have a choice," he said, "to go with him and bleed again, or to walk with me into the unknown. I cannot promise comfort or safety, only freedom." The crowd held its breath. Every pair of eyes was on her. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear herself think. The dirt under her knees felt hot, the sun burning on her torn bonnet, the sting of blood on her lips. For 20 years she'd been told she was worthless, cursed, the cause of her mother's death. For 20 years, no one had ever given her a choice. Until now, Thomas's voice came again, desperate this time. "You can't go with him. He's not your kind. You'd be ruined." Margaret looked at him, really looked, at the trembling hands stained with whiskey, the eyes that held no love, only fear of losing control. Then she looked at the Apache, steady, unflinching, offering nothing but an outstretched hand. Slowly she rose. Her knees shook, dust clinging to her torn dress. The entire town seemed to lean forward. Thomas reached for her, but she stepped back. "I'm sorry, Pa," she said, voice breaking, "but I can't stay." Then she did the unthinkable. She placed her trembling hand into the Apache's. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Thomas lunged, but 2 men grabbed him, not to help her, but to stop the madness from spilling into blood. The sheriff moved finally, putting himself between them. "That's enough, Thomas." "You're making a mistake, girl," her father shouted, fighting their hold. "You'll regret this." Margaret met his eyes one last time. "I already regret staying this long." The Apache's grip on her hand was firm but gentle. Without another word, he led her away from the saloon and the whispers, past the staring faces and the church bell that stood silent and cold. The people parted before them, as if unsure whether to stop them or step aside. No one did either. When they reached the edge of town, Margaret turned back once. Her father stood in the middle of the street, swaying, his face twisted in disbelief. "Margaret," he shouted, "you're dead to me!" She swallowed hard. "Then maybe now I can finally live," she said softly, and faced forward again. The Apache mounted his horse and reached a hand down to her. She hesitated only a second before letting him pull her up behind him. Her arms circled his waist, unsure, trembling. Dry Creek shrank behind them as the horse started forward, hooves kicking up the red dust that had long been her prison. The wind carried her father's final curses until even they faded into silence. Ahead stretched the open prairie, vast, endless, unknown. Margaret didn't know where they were going or what waited for her, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. The prairie stretched endless and quiet beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver. Margaret clung to the Apache's waist as the horse moved steadily through the open land. The town of Dry Creek had long disappeared behind them, swallowed by heat and distance, and with every hoofbeat, the weight of her old life slipped further away. They rode until the sun began to fall, turning the land gold and red. At last, the Apache slowed the horse beside a small stream lined with cottonwoods. He dismounted in one fluid motion, then turned and offered his hand to her. "Come," he said. She slid down awkwardly, her legs trembling from the long ride. The air here was cooler, carrying the scent of water and wild sage. Margaret looked around, unsure what to do. The Apache was already gathering sticks for a fire. His movements were calm, practiced. He worked with quiet purpose, as though the world were not made of chaos. "You must eat," he said after a moment, handing her a strip of dried meat from his saddlebag. Margaret accepted it hesitantly, her hands still shaking. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you help me?" He looked up from the fire, his dark eyes catching the reflection of the flames. "Because no one else would." She had no answer for that. The truth of it burned deeper than her bruises. They ate in silence. When the night settled, full of crickets and distant coyote calls, he handed her a folded blanket from his pack. "You should rest," he said. "You're not afraid I'll run?" Quote, "If you wished to run, you would not have taken my hand," he said simply. Margaret lay down near the fire, staring at the stars. They seemed impossibly bright out here, sharp as diamonds in the clear black sky. For the first time since she could remember, she felt small, but not trapped, like she was part of something vast and living, not buried beneath it. The Apache sat nearby, his back to a boulder, silent as his name. When she finally spoke again, her voice was low. "They call you Silent Crow." "That is what your people call me," he said. "My true name is not for their tongues." "What does it mean?" He hesitated, then replied, "It means he who walks between worlds." Margaret thought of how he'd stood in that street, neither part of the town nor separate from it, somehow belonging everywhere and nowhere. "Then maybe that's why you found me," she said, "because I was caught between worlds too." A small smile touched his mouth. "Perhaps." The fire crackled softly. Margaret wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "What will happen now?" Quote, "Tomorrow we ride north," he said. "There is a valley in the mountains where no one follows. There are others there. People like me and a few not like me at all. You will be safe." "And after that?" He looked into the fire for a long time. "After that, you decide who you are." The simplicity of the answer both frightened and comforted her. All her life, her father had told her who she was. Cursed, foolish, unwanted. Now she had to decide for herself, and she didn't yet know how. When dawn came, they rode again. The days passed, like chapters in a story she was learning to read for the first time. Margaret's bruises faded, her fear eased. The Apache, Silent Crow, spoke little, but his presence was steady, unchanging. He showed her how to drink safely from the streams, how to gather wild onions, how to tie knots that would hold against the wind. At night, they talked in the language of small things, of stars and the songs of the coyotes, and how the desert could look cruel but still give life. One evening, as the sun bled behind the hills, Margaret asked quietly, "You lost someone once, didn't you?" His hand paused on the leather strap he was mending. "Yes," he said at last. "My wife, my daughter. Soldiers came to our camp. They called it peacekeeping." "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Loss teaches us what matters. When I saw your father strike you, I remembered the ones I could not save. I would not fail again." Margaret's throat tightened. "You didn't fail. You gave me back my life." He met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but understanding. Two broken lives that had found a strange kind of healing in each other's company. By the time they reached the mountain valley, spring had touched the land. The air smelled of pine and new grass. A narrow path opened into a meadow surrounded by towering cliffs, and there, scattered between streams and trees, were small cabins and smoke rising from chimneys. Children played near the water. Women carried baskets of herbs. Men mended tools. They all looked up as Silent Crow and Margaret rode in, but no one reached for a weapon. A tall man stepped forward, his hair streaked with gray, his face calm and knowing. "You bring someone new," he said to Silent Crow. "She needed sanctuary," he replied. The man studied Margaret for a moment, then nodded. "All who seek peace find it here." Margaret dismounted, feeling her legs shake with exhaustion and something else. Disbelief, safety, it felt unreal. Days turned into weeks. She learned to work in the garden with the other women, to sew simple clothes, to cook over open fire without burning everything black. She laughed for the first time in years, a sound that startled even her. At night, she and Silent Crow shared quiet meals, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. The silence between them was never heavy. Then, one afternoon, while she was gathering water from the stream, she saw riders on the ridge. 7 men, one of them unmistakable, even from afar, Thomas Bennett. Her heart turned to ice. By the time the warning reached the camp, the riders were already descending the slope. Silent Crow appeared at her side, his hand firm on her arm. "Inside," he said. "Now?" "No," Margaret said, her voice steady though her body trembled. "Not this time." "I won't hide." The riders thundered into the clearing, rifles slung over their shoulders, faces hard. Thomas swung down first, his boots hitting the earth like thunder. "Margaret!" he bellowed. "You're coming home!" Quote. She stood tall beside Silent Crow. "I am home!" "You're shaming me before the whole territory!" he shouted, gesturing wildly. "You think you can just live with savages?" "They showed me more kindness in a day than you did in 20 years. The crowd behind her stirred, silent but ready. Silent Crow's hand hovered near his weapon, though his voice stayed calm. "You will not touch her again." Thomas sneered. "You don't get to tell me what to do with my own blood." Margaret took a breath. The fear that had once ruled her felt far away now, a shadow she no longer lived under. "I'm not your blood anymore," she said. Something inside her father broke then. Maybe pride, maybe the last piece of a soul already poisoned by years of drink and bitterness. He looked at her as if seeing a ghost, then turned, mounted his horse, and spat into the dirt. "You're dead to me," he said hoarsely. Margaret watched him ride away, the dust swallowing him whole. She felt no triumph, no anger, only a strange, quiet peace. When the riders were gone, Silent Crow turned to her. "You stood your ground," he said softly. "I was tired of kneeling." He nodded once. "Then you are free." She smiled faintly, the first true smile in years. "I think I've been free since the moment you said, 'Enough.'" Quote. That night, as the valley settled into calm again, the stars came out, bright and endless, like promises. Margaret sat beside the fire, Silent Crow across from her. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "You saved my life." He shook his head. "No. You saved your own. I only reminded you that you could." Quote. Margaret looked up at the sky, vast, wild, eternal, and for the first time in her life she understood what it meant to belong not to someone else, but to herself. She was no longer her father's burden, nor the town's shame. She was simply Margaret Rose Bennett, whole, unbroken, and free beneath the endless western sky.